if there's anything in my life that I've been able to rely on over and over again, it's that when I did not rely on the gatekeepers to judge and dictate and tell me whether or not whatever I was creating or writing or the story I was trying to tell, when they weren't telling me that it was good, whenever I've not relied on them for their own approval, that's where I've won. And winning can be defined in a lot of different ways, but at least for myself professionally and even personally, when I've picked myself, when I've not waited on someone else to pick me, I've always won.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Sam Dever Podcast, episode 111. In this episode, I speak with Tanner Latham. Tanner is an executive podcast producer and co-founder of Ingredient, a creative agency in Los Angeles. This was a terrific conversation. Tanner has a vast amount of knowledge and experience in the podcasting industry, and I can't wait for you to check it out. To watch this podcast, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@thesamdeverpodcast. To listen to this podcast, be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Here's my conversation with Tanner. Well, Tanner Latham, welcome to the Sam Dever Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sam. Sam and Eric.
That's
Appreciate
right.
it.
Yeah.
We all met at Podcast Movement in downtown Los Angeles. It was the first night.
It was.
We all met. It was like the center bar area or whatever down in the lobby, I think.
That's right. And I was thinking about it because the way that we met was a really, I think it's something that when I was thinking more about how we now know each other, it was really cool because essentially this podcast conference is like any other conference. It could have been any kind of industry conference, but it was focused on podcasting. And you and I and Eric, when we were all there as creators, we were there as producers, essentially. But like in any one of these situations, you've got a whole big conference where there are decision makers, the people with the money, the people that are greenlighting big projects. And then there's the whole mass of us that are trying to get their attention. And so when we met, it was the first night. It was the opening cocktail party that was open to any attendee, essentially. And I can remember I had gone there with one of my colleagues, one of my podcast producers and I were there, and we decided to split up because we thought we could cover more ground by not just staying, the two of us together. We wanted to meet as many people as possible. But what that also meant was that I was going to be by myself, and me being by myself in a group full of strangers in a setting that was kind of like high school can be, like a high school dance where you've got all these little groups of people that are packed up together. Sometimes they know each other, sometimes they don't. But as myself, by myself, I was looking at this whole room of little groups of people. And the young me started to kind of come out and think, oh gosh, what if they reject you? Like, what if you walk up and you try to make conversation and they're not having it, And so like this like little voice was in my head going, okay, you just gotta go pick a group, just insert yourself into the conversation. This is why you're here, Now, like the healthy person is like, of course, it's a big conference. Nobody's gonna, reject you or anything like that. But I still had that little voice in my head. So I'm looking at surveying the whole room, and I'm just kind of scanning left and right, and I've got my drink or whatever. And I saw the two of you standing there. And I think, now that I think back on it, I think there was just something open. Your body language was, you guys were having a conversation, you were laughing. Like I saw it as like a safe two guys, I don't know if they're gonna want to talk to me or not, but I could at least start by getting in there with these guys.
Warm up the engine.
Exactly. Warm up the engine, get ready for I'll be ready to go then. And I stepped up, introduced myself, and then however many months later, now we're sitting here and we're talking about this, and we talked about a lot of different things, and I think we got into our own work and our own business and what we were trying to do pretty quickly, which is not a big surprise. But I think we had a really good connection, and I think it was is memorable enough for us to still be talking. I thought it was really great.
I love that. And you're completely right about those events and stuff like that. It's always going up to that first person.
Yeah.
Once you do it, you're like, oh, okay, you loosen up and you're able to. But I'm so glad you did approach. And I remember you and I had run into each other at least 2 or 3 times throughout the week.
Later.
So we had
exactly.
side conversations after
Yeah,
that
that's
repeatedly.
Right.
And then I remember you had said, hey, we're going to be doing an event at
That's
our
right.
studio.
That's right.
I'll let you know when. And then one day I got that email. I'm like, this is it. Yeah, I'm going down. And then we go down. Beautiful studio, by the way.
Thank you.
Ingredient studio.
That's right.
And then we talked about doing this podcast, and here we are.
I know.
So that's all over like a 6-month
right
span. But I guess that does show the beauty of conferences.
It does.
And stuff like that. And shout out to Podcast Movement. It was a great
conference. A great conference. It really was a great conference. And it allowed me at least to get a better sense of what was happening in the industry and kind of like where things might be going. I mean, it's a very interesting industry to be in, as you know, and there's a lot of peaks and a lot of valleys to it. But it was really great to be around a lot of people that were speaking the language that we speak, really trying to connect with people, trying to tell stories. That's why I got into it initially.
Have you been to a lot of conferences before?
I'd only been to maybe 2 other podcast movements. The last one I went to was here in LA, and I think I went to one other one. I can't remember which. It might have been Chicago. But yeah, that's the only one of this industry I've been to. But that's, I don't know. Have you gone to many other podcast conferences?
Eric and I went to the meetup. They had a meetup in Burbank.
Got it.
That's how we found out about it.
Right.
But I have not been. I wasn't able to go to DC.
Mm-hmm.
That just happened. But I think the next one's in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I'm able to make it, I definitely would go. I had a blast at that thing. Like you're talking to people like you said, speaking the language and talking about uploading and editing and all these different things. When most of us are in a room by ourselves with a laptop for a lot of the days. Sometimes.
Exactly.
So to be able to connect and people relate to you. Yeah, it felt great.
Face to face.
Yeah.
Face to face. Yeah. So much of our world is behind the screen, and we're on Zooms or we're on other calls, if that. But like you said, so much can also just be solo and really lonely and really just like, is anybody else listening? Is anybody else like caring about the things that I care about? And so, yeah, I think it was really good.
Yeah. And it really showed for me, it really showed you how much is out there.
Mm-hmm.
How deep this all goes. And that's why I was excited for you to come on, because you're pretty experienced in this game, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're able to talk about it, but you were there for a specific purpose with one of your shows, right?
We were, yeah. So we actually had two different concepts that we were pitching, and that's about all I can say about them at this point. But that was really our main purpose, was to get those concepts in front of as many people as possible. It's the kind of podcasts that we make primarily are either branded podcasts, which are made on behalf of big corporations, big companies, organizations, things like that. A lot of times that's like it'll be maybe a leader in the organization is wanting to do an interview show about the major things in their industry. And so we create shows like that. And then at Podcast Movement, what we were trying to do, we have a couple of original series shows. They're both nonfiction, documentary style, narrative podcast series. And so we were taking those to try to make meetings with some of the buyers that were, basically in the market for that kind of content and that kind of material. And so it was also, that was also a really exciting and nerve-wracking and it's a real it's really difficult sometimes to like get the pitch down and to get, I know that I've got perhaps one shot with this person, even if I can even get that. And so I've got to be able to tell the story that we're doing, and I've got to convey with them the concept and what the vision we have for the series can be, and why we think it's relevant for right now, why it's more interesting or differentiated in some way from all of the other millions of podcasts that are out there. And so it was I had a good conference in that respect, but it was also really kind of nerve wracking to bring that pitch and to be putting it out there and getting real time feedback on some of the shows we're trying to produce.
Yeah, and then like I said, you opened my mind to going, and we're going to get into all of it because you've done a lot of things.
Sure.
But the concept of developing these shows and then selling them off, or these series, if you will, not just doing just a long form 2-hour, let's just keep going type of thing like this is, which that has its own place. But,
right.
Like we were talking before we started recording, the Harriet Tubman podcast, you guys did stellar.
Thank you.
You actually sent me down a Pat Conroy rabbit hole.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
But it was so, I know that it's very easy to get all over the place because you've done so many things. But yeah, it really was eye-opening to talk to you and learn that and just realize that, okay, there's so many different segments of this podcast game.
That's right.
So I'm thinking maybe for conversation purposes, if we could, before we dive into everything you do, if we could get a little backstory. As far back or as far little as you want, just how you ended up getting to podcasting.
Oh gosh. I'll go back far because it will connect. Like I really do think it's going to connect. So I grew up in a small rural community in Alabama, this little town called Piedmont, and it's in the kind of the northeastern part of the state. There were about 5,000 people who lived there when I was there, and it's roughly the same population today. The industry there was there were a couple of mills in town. So at the time there was like a cotton mill that was there in town, and there were a couple of other small factories that were in operation, and those were the primary employers for the town. My dad was a dentist. At one time he was one of like only 2 dentists in town. My mom was she was a nurse and ended up teaching nursing and became a nursing professor and a dean of nursing eventually. But they were raising my brother and me in this little town. And my family, I think part of why I took the steps that I took in my life and in my career really goes back to my family, especially my mom's side of the family. They were all storytellers. My Uncle Frankie, who I knew for most of my life through probably my early 30s, was this master storyteller. And we would go over to their house for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or holidays, things like that. And Frankie would just command the room or the back porch or the out by the garage. He would go out and he would sit in his chair, and everybody in the family would just sit around him and listen to him tell stories. And so even as a child, even that young, I think what I was getting a sense of was just the rhythm of storytelling and the power of storytelling, and how influential and effective that it was on me to listen to my Uncle Frankie tell stories. And because Uncle Frankie was telling stories, that also meant that many other people in the family would also contribute their own stories. And so I grew up with that as a major part of my family and my own culture. And so I left that place, left that town, got out of Piedmont, and I went to school. And eventually my first job out of college was became a travel writer with the magazine called Southern Living Magazine, based in Alabama. It was a regional cultural magazine all about the South. And in the South, Southern living is kind of like the Bible. You have the real Bible, the Holy Bible, but you also have a Southern living. You have those two things on your coffee table. And I'd grown up with Southern living in my house. My grandparents all had Southern livings, and so it was kind of like this. Um, from a media standpoint, if there was ever going to be a magazine at that time that was going to define what the South was or what Southern culture was, it was this magazine. And so I got really lucky and was able to land a job there. And I started writing travel stories for for the magazine. I stayed there for 10 years, which is crazy. When I tell a lot of people that, I say, yeah, I was on staff for 10 years at a magazine. That's not going to happen anymore in media, and it's rare that that happens in any other industry either. Like that's just not, people have a couple of years here, have a couple of years there, and they keep moving. Um, but I started going out on the road every single week. I would get in my car, get on a plane, and I would go somewhere in the South, and I would just parachute in, immerse myself in a place, in that place itself, and just try to describe and report on what I thought I was experiencing or what I was seeing, and then go back, write the stories, and it would, give to our readers, here's what it's like to be in Savannah, here's what it's like to be in Charleston or Asheville or parts of Texas, the hill country of Texas. And so it was kind of like this, it was this most amazing graduate school and career and everything all wrapped up in one, and the kind of freedom that I could just really, I could go so many places and become, just fade back into the background and just experience something. And so it was so much fun. I had a blast. I met so many people that I've stayed in touch with, a lot of people that I would have a really great connection. Maybe I was writing a story about them, maybe I wasn't, but I've met a lot of different people all over that I'm still connected to. I had some kind of great connection with them, and we've stayed in touch. And after being there for 7 or 8 years, I got really interested in multimedia. At the time, this was still we were just now getting into right at the beginning of social media, but the magazine did not have a social media, any kind of social media accounts or anything like that. So that was still very nascent. But I was interested in multimedia. I was interested in going out and trying to either film or record with my audio recorder the sound that I was hearing, the pictures that I was seeing. I just thought that my descriptions using my own words and writing failed to really capture the timbre of someone's voice that I was hearing. And I just thought, I think that our readers would be even more interested once they read a story about somebody. They'd be even more interested if they could somehow hear that person's voice or somehow see how that person moved. And again, this is like 2007, 2008. So early web, early website for media companies. I was really just thinking like, if when I meet this person, they need to hear, the people I'm writing for need to hear what this person sounds like. And so that's what got me so interested in sound and in recording and in motion, and really paying more attention to that and how effective that can be from a storytelling perspective. And the thing that the thing that's important, not only for this part of the story, but just in general, is I really had to teach myself how to do all those things. I've been listening to a lot of episodes of your podcast, Sam, and I wanted to get ready. I wanted to get a good sense about you and get a sense about what to expect. And I've been listening to, and while the people who you have on the show, while I may not be doing exactly the same thing they are doing, I'm hearing a lot. I'm hearing a lot of things that I can relate to, and things that I know, even if I'm doing something completely different as an artist or as a producer, as a creator, I still think I can take it away and apply it to my own life. And one of the things that I think I've heard in many occasions, and you tell me if this is true, but I think a lot of people have decided to teach themselves how to do something when it wasn't it wasn't apparent. It was going to be really difficult for them to either go to an institution, to go to school, to go to afford to pay for it, but they knew they wanted to, do it, and the only way it was going to happen is if they taught themselves how to do it and just jumped in and did it, and I mean, this podcast that you have here could be one of those instances where you taught yourself how to get started, what to do, and there's so much more than just pressing record and asking really, poignant questions, right? I mean, is that
No,
you think
that's
right?
accurate. A lot of people that have come on here, they take their destiny into their own hands, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah.
And I was telling you beforehand, my speaking things produce your passion, which is people that come on this podcast produce their passion. They, Blake Tamarkin, who's the episode 106, who's out this week, he just went and made his film. He didn't wait for permission. He just made it happen and used all his resources. And that's whether filmmakers or actors or entrepreneurs, there seems to be just this common thread of everyone, of like these people that just want to make it happen and bring it to life. So yes, thank you for tuning in as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was listening. So he's the one who went back, I think, to maybe where he grew up for a certain period of time to film.
Went to Chicago. Yeah.
The Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was saying how the best film school you can have is to just find the people that want to go make stuff. I thought that was a brilliant perspective, because a lot of people will, let me go to this university, let me go do this, but with technology. And that's why I think your story's fat. By the way, that job sounds awesome.
That was a great job.
It sounds like pre-social media, like, man, what a gig. That sounds great.
It was really great.
I would totally do that. But
it was really great.
But yeah, we live in an age now where we have the technologies where you don't need a big studio or, a big distribution company. We have YouTube, we have all these different tools and platforms that we can make our own stuff and distribute it. The results of that's a whole other topic.
100%.
But you can do it.
That's right.
And that's the most important thing to at least me, just to do it.
That's exactly right. And I've been fortunate enough to speak to different journalism classes, and every time I'll get the question, well, how do I get published? How do I get my story? And in this case, this was a print or digital. They were writers, and they were like, oh, how do I get my stories out there? And my only answer is, do you have some kind of a blog or some kind of a platform or something where you're publishing the stories that you're writing on your own? Because I can tell you right now that an editor first is never gonna, they're not just going to give you a shot, and they're gonna need to see what you can do, even if it's on something that seems very I don't know the right word, not unsophisticated, but even if it's just your own work that has barely been edited, they need to be able to see what it is that you can do. And they say, well, I've got a million story ideas, and I keep pitching those ideas, and I say, well, if they keep rejecting them, then go assign yourself to that story and go write the story yourself. And then send it in and say, here's, this is what I think is a viable story. Will you read it now? And like you said, it's not a guarantee. But it's definitely a step closer to where it is that you might be trying to get to, And I didn't know the first thing about audio recording. At this time, this will show you how long ago it was. there were iPods that were the small. There was like a version of an iPod which looked about the size of a, it was a little bigger than a stamp essentially, and I somehow found this plug-in microphone recorder that would go into the bottom of an iPod. And once it was inserted into the bottom, it allowed you could press a record button. And I would take this little thing and I would just stick it in people's faces. And I would, I'd ask my question like this and do it. I mean, it looked so amateur, I'm sure, but the people that I was talking to didn't care. They were interested in me because I was interested in them. And so I was just getting this audio onto an iPod, and then I had to go back, back to my hotel room and download it back to my laptop computer and then figure out what I was going to do with it. And it was so exciting. It was so exciting. And I felt like I was inventing something. I wasn't, but I just felt like I was in the middle of something really interesting and exciting. And I was going out on my own and I was finding the stories and doing the stories myself and really adding an element to these stories that they didn't have. And so that just kind of clicked in for me. And I thought, I think I really want to get into multimedia and I really want to dive into that, just take that next step. And so I left the magazine, resigned from the magazine, and decided that I wanted to get into radio. I'd been listening to religiously to shows like This American Life and Radio Lab, and I was just absorbing all of what I was hearing from an audio storytelling technique. Everything that I was learning, I was listening to hours and hours of these shows, and I was paying careful attention to transitions and setups, and the way that they were allowing certain parts of the episode to breathe with music. And I was just again, it was like another graduate course in audio storytelling, and it was all just me listening and listening and listening and listening. And so I finally got the guts up to go and ask the local NPR station if I could do a radio story. Now, I had never done a radio story before. I didn't have any experience at all. I was at this time I was probably in my like late 20s, early 30s, and I wasn't a kid, and I just thought, all they can say is no. So let me just ask. And I had there was the program director at the station was really, really generous. And I sent her a cold email and I said, you don't know who I am, but I've heard you on the air for years and I'm really interested in doing a radio story. And I've got some ideas, but I've never done one. What do you think? And she, thank goodness, wrote me back and said, sure, come on and let's come pitch me the stories. We'll figure out if they're worth us creating together. And yeah, sure, come on. And her name's Tanya Ott, and Tanya Ott was like she was the door into what changed my entire life. And she gave me the opportunity to do one story for WBHM, the public radio station in Birmingham, Alabama. And that set me on a path that, again, completely changed my life. And from there, a combination of both really being so interested in loving the medium so much and being so intrigued by using audio to convey stories, tell stories, give information, with the confidence of someone giving me a shot and saying yes, one time to something I did, I took off from there. And I worked in public radio stations there in Birmingham, and then I ended up going to Charlotte, North Carolina. I was on staff there as an on-air reporter, and from there was contributing stories to national NPR. And so I was completely immersed in radio at this point, and I was like like radio. This is probably 2010, 11. And so podcasting was technically around, but was very far from being ubiquitous. And, there was no, nothing like it is today. But I was on the radio side of things. So I was on the public radio side and just kind of went from there. So I'll pause here because I'm just now in the early 2010s, and I think
we got ways to go. But no, this is awesome, man. This is yeah, you're right, and that's. I mean, there was probably. I mean, I don't know the number, but you're right. Very few people probably podcasting at all. So radio was the dominant audio form.
It was still, I wish I had the factual years for when, for example, like the Apple Podcast app was launched. I can't remember when that was, but this was still the time, going back to that iPod again, the time when you would actually download episodes to the iPod that you could then stick in your pocket and listen to with tethered headphones. And so that was, that's what I was doing, frankly.
I had one of those little squares that I wore to the gym and worked out. For some reason, then things have just changed so much. Like now, I don't even know if iPods are even around. It's your phone now.
That's right. Like, I'm sure they don't sell them. It's got to be like secondhand places. But yeah, it's vintage now. So, collectors, I'm sure, probably buy them. But there's no, there's no value to them anymore because they were effectively, they're dead without being tethered to some kind of computer. They don't have any kind of Wi-Fi in them or anything like that.
Well, I love it. And because you remind me of, like you said, when I was figuring out doing this, I had my laptop and I got these cheap microphones off Amazon that plug into the laptop, one for you, one for the guest.
USB.
And I'm like, okay, well, if I just record us in GarageBand, because I'd use GarageBand for music stuff, I'm like, technically that will be the audio track, so I'm just going to do that.
Yeah.
Did it come out perfect? Absolutely not. Did it get the job done in the beginning? Yeah.
Right.
It did. So that when you're telling that story, though, it's that following that creative intuition.
That's right.
You're following that. You just figuring out a way to make it work.
Totally. Yeah. And I think something interesting here as well is that I think a lot of times, even now, I will find myself attempting to find the absolute perfect solution before I even get started. And if I'm avoiding the project, or if it's something creative that I'm wanting to do, but I'm a little scared about it, or I'm a little afraid whether or not it's really going to work. One, delay tactic is to think, do I have the perfect equipment to pull this thing off? Because if I don't have the perfect equipment, then it's gonna fail, and it's a distraction. It is a pure distraction from just starting, just getting going with it, just rolling. Like that's another one of those lessons where it would have been very easy for me to talk myself out of not being able to just go for it by putting all of these obstacles in the way, saying, I don't have the perfect X, the perfect Y, or the perfect Z yet, so I can't get started. But, just the fact that you got what you knew you needed, and it was 2 microphones,
Yeah.
And you didn't even need 2, frankly. You could have done it with 1 and gone back and forth, and it would have been exactly, it would have been just fine. It's not how you would do it now, but if that had like blocked you and kept you from going, just think about that. About, and then you just get sidetracked, and then you don't finish the thing that you really want to do.
When I had to get it to a certain point to be able to work with Eric, when Eric and I combined forces. What up, Eric, over there?
Hey, Eric.
What's up?
But the best part is the first 10 minutes of the first episode, the mics aren't plugged in. I forgot to plug it in. So it's getting recorded, which, to your point, the sound's still recorded on the laptop. It's even worse.
Right.
But I could have done it just with the laptop microphone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to call it analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
I just finished Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. He talks about alibis. We come up with alibis like,
That's it.
well, I can't do this because of that. And
That's
you
right.
just start, in what Eric and I have had this conversation, the more you just do it, the better you get. So you have to get your licks in.
Totally.
You can't just start with the best of everything and you've never done anything. You're not going to know how to use it or utilize it. So the more you do, the equipment comes, the improvement comes, but the only way you get that is by doing.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I'm 47, and this year, one of the projects we were working on, there was a certain element. I'll keep it general because it doesn't even matter what it was, but there was a certain element of the project that I had literally never done before, and it was intimidating. And I had psyched myself out about it, and I thought, only the pros can do this thing. The pros, like I'm there are gradations obviously within our industry. And I had talked myself out of this, and I'd said to myself, maybe I should give this over to somebody else who can do a really good job with this. And it was just everything you're talking about. It was, I gave myself every other alibi, or every other reason not to do it. And what ended up happening was, couple things fell out and the deadline was approaching, and I did not have any other option except to do it myself. And I literally had to shut everything else out, and I had to just focus just on that. And it was like the monster under the bed. And the whole time I'm thinking it's this massive, horrible thing that's going to eat me. And as soon as I got one step done in the middle of it, I thought, I can do this. And it was not easy. And I won't say that all of a sudden, snap, it was over. But I got into it, and every single step through that process, I thought, I could have done this all along, I really could have done this all along. And I've got more in me than I think, and I know more than I think I do, or I'm not giving myself enough credit. And it was just this wonderful exercise in, it's okay. Like, I can step into something like this. I can do this element now. And the next time this happens, I know exactly how to do it. And I don't have to be afraid of that any longer, And it was just like the monster in the bed, nothing. Like, it was just shadows. And then all of a sudden it's gone, and and I just thought, when am I going to learn that lesson? Like, I'm not a young man anymore. I'm not amateur anymore. I'm not, but I'm still coming up against things like that again, that little voice that we were talking about at the beginning, that little voice is just like, you're not good enough for that. Or yeah, let somebody else handle that. You've never been able to do that. And it just, that voice is so small and so powerful and can be snuffed out easily. It really can be.
Yeah, I'm glad you told that. Thank you for telling that. And it's actually reassuring. I mean that as a compliment to you, that someone to your level. And right. By the way, you guys, we'll get into it, but the ingredient websites are spectacular.
Thank you.
You guys have done some stellar work. Very impressed. Great stuff. But yeah, we've talked about this a few times. It seems the more you do become successful in something, you would think that those voices go away. But in fact, they come, if not even stronger sometimes. And you just realize that it's always going to be there.
It's always going to be there.
It's always going to be there, but you have a choice.
Right.
You have a choice. You can either listen to it and stay stagnant, or bash it down.
Yeah, right.
And jump into that positivity and courage. Really take the courage, not the fear.
That's right.
That's exactly so I totally relate to what you just said.
Yeah, it doesn't go away. And at the same time, it's like, I know, I am confident that even if the next big hurdle is not the exact same thing that I did, with that particular project, I still, I don't know, I put a big box around that thing, and I packaged it up, and I put it right in the middle of my head. And I said, it was truly one of the most professionally satisfying things I may have ever done, and definitely satisfying that I've done in the last 5 years. and no one would know that it was, it's not published, it's not out in the world, it's not, there's no award attached to it, anything at all like that. But it was one of those things where I told myself after the fact, I said, remember this, remember this, remember that you did this. And so the next time that voice pops up, it's like, oh, hell no, no, this, you're not going to distract me. You're not going to take me down this road. I know that I know I can handle this because of the thing I did, the thing I did before. And it's just like, how am I just learning this? But I'm glad I did. I'm glad I did. Got a lot of big things in front of me. But it surprised me. It really surprised me.
Where do you think that comes from? Just in general, maybe not with yourself, but just humans in general. I'm just curious why.
Insecurities or
just the
powering through, or
the questioning of oneself, of our abilities to do something.
Good question. I mean, I imagine that is as human nature as, breathing. There are probably a select few of people. I say probably, maybe not. I don't know if there's any. I've never met anyone. Let me back up and say it this way. I've never met anyone who, when they were being honest and genuine, weren't questioning themselves or feeling insecure about the thing that they were working on. They may have been incredibly confident and high performing in whatever industry, whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. At the same time, they're still questioning themselves. There's still some kind of insecurity, and it's coming at them from different ways. And sometimes it's not the obvious way. They might be insecure about something that might not seem, the outside world may not think that that's ever should be an insecurity, I guess. I think it's with all of us. Have you ever met anybody that could fool you into thinking that they had it all figured out? Or I don't know.
Well, I was just going to say, I do like hearing the entrepreneur stories of the ones that, you see the outside version of, I knew without a shadow of a doubt, like this was going to happen. And I was just positive thinking every single day, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure that a lot of that exists, but then it's actually refreshing to hear the entrepreneur stories of like, every day, everything could have crashed and I didn't sleep. And this, I love the story of, again, butchering it, but you can Google it, the founder of FedEx, where literally he didn't have payroll. So he went to Vegas.
Oh no.
And won and made payroll. And then the rest was history. They were able to get through that moment. But that seems like, and that's why I'm excited to go into business with your philosophies on that too, because with entrepreneurship, it can be going great, but it's like you got to keep feeding the beast and it keeps moving. And to hear those stories of like someone of that status doing what they had to do in the beginning. Yeah. I mean, a company like that in the beginning stages, they didn't have payroll. So he's like, I'm going to Vegas with the remainder of the dough. And he ends up winning. He was able to make payroll for everybody. And then they didn't have to do that again.
Crazy. That's crazy. Yeah. I don't know. I think one thing that makes me think about is how often I get faced with I've never been, luckily, knock on this wooden table, I've never been in a situation where I needed to have to say, okay, it's either this or the business is over. We've been very fortunate with what we've done so far, but I don't know if I've got the guts to think I'm going to gamble on this. I guess that's part of the spirit of this person, that, that person was going to go hard or go home in a very literal sense. And, it obviously worked, but I'm just thinking it's making me get like queasy. I'm like, wow, that's really ballsy. And I don't know if I've got that, I'm a lot more conservative when it comes to like, I'd be like, what if we just stop payroll for like what if we find a different maybe what we do is just a really light layoff, and then I know that that's not necessarily an option always, but like that's it's super bold and super crazy, and it obviously could have gone a different way, and but that's not the point of the story.
Well, the person that initially told me the story, give credit where credit's due. I'm paraphrasing him. His name's Ryan Edwards. He's an entrepreneur out here. He looked at me and he goes, "You know what the difference between an entrepreneur and a startup founder is?" And I'm like, "What?" Because I was kind of thinking it was maybe kind of the same thing. And he's like, "An entrepreneur, they make money. They see opportunities. It's more, what's my exit strategy?
Right.
Buy, sell,
Right.
Yada, yada."
Right.
He's like, "A startup founder, they're willing to die for it." And then I remember going, I'm probably more into like that realm to a certain degree, but yeah, it's just interesting, right? It's just, everyone's made up differently, and there's different paths to the end goal.
Right.
So, but yeah, you're right. There doesn't have to be so extreme maybe, but then maybe sometimes.
I don't know though. I mean, this opens a new path though. So short of death, I don't know if you'd be willing to die.
I think it was a figure of speech.
It's a figure of speech, but tell me your own, like, where you are. I mean, if you feel comfortable talking about, are you?
You said we were getting uncomfortable in this way. Yeah, man, I'm all in.
Yeah,
I'm all in.
Let me ask the question a different way. It's not tell me where you are. It's more, you've committed because you believe what? Give me the end of that sentence. I'm committed to this because I believe fill in the blank.
I believe that this can continue to get bigger and bigger. And because of my workflow with Eric, how well we work together. And Eric and I, with this first time us announcing this on the podcast. So we film on Tuesdays usually. Monday's chest day at the gym.
I was hoping that's what you're going to say it. If it wasn't, I was going to say it. Yes, it's bench press day.
I was going to say, this is literally the chest day of the gym, right?
Chest day at the gym. So, like I said, Mondays, the episode comes out.
Yeah.
And okay, the episode's out. We meet in the afternoons at the gym, and chest day is important. Like, it's a pretty big day at the gym. We're spotting each other. We're motivating each other. And I remember I said to him yesterday, as far as wanting to keep going, and I'm excited to dive into just the future of podcasting and stuff like that, because it's an industry where, you look at those numbers and you have ones that do better than others, and, you shouldn't do it. But then you start looking at other ones and like, oh God, they have how many views and downloads? And you're like, well, am I even doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And I told Eric, I go, man, but our workflow's too good.
Yeah.
And I got this notes from you when I talked to you at your event. Yeah. You said I said we're doing the one episode a week and it's a ton of work. And you're like, and you told me, but you're strengthening that muscle.
100%.
And Eric, you can give your thoughts. It's a whole lot easier probably us doing the one a week than it was 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like just our systems that we have in place, and you learn. And so it for me, it's working. Like, we're turning these products out and we're having episodes and you have clips that go viral and you're getting some traction. But there's part of me too that when I'm in it, I'm like, man, this is a beast of a product. This is a big thing. And listening through your podcast that you've done, I'm like, man, that was really smart what they did. Like picking a niche thing and doing a series and then branding it, and then you can sell that off. I'm like, yeah. Instead of saying like, hey, let's do the Joe Rogan thing.
Right.
And just start talking for 2 hours to people in LA. But for me, I feel a purpose with it. I feel a purpose and I can't explain it. It just feels like what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
I just feel like I'm right now, you and I are supposed to be having this conversation.
Yep.
From 6 months ago, meeting you and staying in contact, and now we are to this moment here. So I don't know if that directly answers it, but yeah, I made a decision 6 months, right at that podcast conference. I had made the decision. So my background, sales jobs, and I'd always done those, and then done my projects on the outside of all that. And one of them had come to an end. And so, yeah, I was doing the whole job thing, and, we're still doing this podcast, but it's just the job market was putting so much effort into it. And I had gotten to the end of one job that I was down to the final, and it didn't work out. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, why am I putting so much effort and energy into this? What if I put that all into myself and what this current project was? So I had that energy going into podcast movement.
Wow.
I had made that decision
Yeah.
going into there.
Right.
Hey, I don't know what this looks like,
Yeah.
but I'm just going to go to this thing. And then I have to give that, and shout out to Jared Easley with Podcast Movement.
Right.
That gave me so much energy. And that's when I came to Eric. I'm like, do you think we could do one of these a week? Do you think we could pull that off? And we both looked at each other, let's do it. And then it's really been a roller coaster since, going that hard at it. So yeah, but it is all self-funded. It is all
right. It's hard.
And I had told, and I'd be curious to your perspective too. It's like, because people oh, you can get sponsors and you can get this. I'm like, yeah, but you got to have numbers to show it. I actually had some individuals give me some numbers at the conference and say, this is the type of range you need to be in for that type of thing. And I'm like, how many?
I know.
How many thousand do you need? But it was good because they gave me a very direct thing. So my mindset has just been, hey,
it's goals.
Let's just get great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just get as good as we can be. And I guess the question is well, how long can you sustain that without compromising it, but still being able to survive at the same time?
Yeah, you are a startup founder, it's the runway question, how much runway do you actually have?
Yeah.
It's no, so I do want to, you said something that, so I made a few notes, but one of the things that I think, one of the strengths I think you guys have in what you're doing is all right, here's how I wrote it. We all have rich, interesting networks of people in our lives, and we can learn something from all of them. And so one of the things that I think that you are enabling right now is you're enabling yourself to learn from other people, in a very literal way. All of this could be a series of coffee meetups that, if you go back over your 100 or so guests, those all could have been lunches or coffees or drinks somewhere where you sit down and you just have a really good conversation with them and they share about a little bit more about their backstory. And then you get to, but you've actually formalized it in some way and you've put a format around it. And so that's one of the things that I think so great about this is that I don't know your listeners, but I know me. And I know that when I'm listening to your show, what I hear is, like I said before, I hear relatability. I hear someone on the other end of those questions that you're asking. I hear that person doing a lot of the same things that I'm either doing or have done. And so, quote unquote, they're regular people. They're not, I could listen to celebrity podcasts all day long and hear the big break story or hear the, hear conversations that are not relatable and that are more out of touch than what my life actually is. And I think one of the strengths of your show here is just that, is that I'm hearing something that is familiar to me and I'm taking away something. There's also a community aspect to it in the sense that I don't feel alone. I don't feel like the thing that I'm going through is solely my own thing to go through, because I can hear in the interviews you're doing that other people are faced with the same kinds of challenges. Again, even if it's completely different industries, they're not doing the same thing I'm doing. I'm not doing the same thing they're doing. But there's like a thread. I can hear the thread, and that's comforting, And so there's not necessarily a business model yet to comforting and community, but there's certainly what's happening is, I imagine, is that you're building an audience that is interested in that kind of connection, in those kinds of real conversations that you are enabling, that you are leading, that you are providing, that the two of you are actually, capturing and documenting and distributing. And so there's something there. There's something there. And I don't know. I think, I don't know what the numbers that whoever you talked to was talking about, but you're right. I mean, on that side of the industry, it's like other industries in the sense that, until you have thousands and thousands and thousands of listeners, it's going to be really difficult for a sponsor to justify putting their name on something, or, how will they know that what you're delivering to your audience is their target, who they're trying to get to. But there's something to the niche. There's something to the niche thing, and I don't have my finger on it yet, but there's something about creatives, entrepreneurs, people that are self-starters, people that are trying to make something of their own, volition, finding a community at the Sam Dever podcast. There's something there. And whatever we all are, the kinds of threads and commonalities that we all have as listeners, there is a sponsor out there that will want to connect with us. And so, again, I don't think that's necessarily a solution, but that's part of what I'm hearing as I listen to the show. What does that sound like?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to any episodes and for that feedback. And that actually you're the first person to have worded it like that, but that makes sense, because when I started this, I remember I'm a talker. I talk to people, whether it was outside acting class or wherever I'm at, even in my old jobs or whatever, but I can have conversations with people. And I just remember I would have just all these amazing conversations with people in parking lots. Like,
yeah,
when we would leave acting class or whatever, where Eric and I met, like, you'd think you're going to your car. Next thing you know, it's 90 minutes later, you're talking life philosophy.
Amazing.
But I'm like, man, this would be really cool just to record this. So the fact that you described it that way, I think that's the essence of what this is. And I do think too, like, you can't, because if I change things, because I say this all the time, if I wanted to make this the Hollywood podcast, 20 minutes long, come on in, we would probably have way more subscribers, way more, probably, because it's going to be an easier, okay, they talk to Hollywood, it's only 20 minutes of my time.
Right.
It's an easy, I'll subscribe to that. Where this is kind of, okay, actor one day, filmmaker,
yep,
Buddhist monk,
yeah, right,
doctor,
right.
But I like that aspect of it. That keeps it interesting to me. So for me, when I think sponsors and that, it's that game too of like, you want to meet the right sponsor, the right person where you guys are going to like, hey, this is good for the both of us, not just become a NASCAR nothing wrong with it, because a lot of people do it, but NASCAR podcast where we got 20 sponsors, here's discount codes, like 20,000 links in your thing.
Right.
People get turned off by that too. I would rather keep building this, keeping it the purity that it is, keep growing it. And then if a sponsorship with the right startup company or the right whoever, like, hey, we want to be tied to that. And then I think that makes sense. That's really one of my first times articulating that out loud about that. But that's a great question.
Yeah.
But it's hard not to get caught up in the numbers.
Right. I mean, because at the end of the day, it is a business, and it is, that's the currency that you offer. It's that this number of people, this is how long they're listening, et cetera, all the metrics that you're thinking through.
Yeah.
I will say, so totally, just to think about, I know you've thought a lot about it.
Sure.
There could be a yes and to the long form interview. And I know this is more on the editing side and it's more work. It's a lot more work. There could be more microcast style episodes where it's either, one thing to think about could be thinking about if you ask the common question of 5 different people and you get 5 different answers to that particular question. And I don't know how often that happens where you've got kind of your, what rhythm you have with some of your questions, but there might be a way to package the answers to a similar style question where you're kind of hearing 4 or 5 different voices and it's bump, 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 bump. And now, now you've got an episode that's not, it doesn't take the place of the, of your longer form interview, because I think that's really strong still. But it's maybe a different entry point for a new listener.
Like little mashup episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually a great idea. And just have maybe a separate playlist on the YouTube channel.
Correct.
Maybe.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
And so they get, it's like a, greatest hits is a little too broad, but if you think about, I would imagine that if you kind of go back through, especially your most recent, 25, 30 episodes, there are probably some similar answers or people wrestling with something, because, we're all living in the same time. There's probably some things that each person that's on the show, they've got their own kind of take on it. And for a listener, it's like a distillation of the wisdom of the guests of the Sam Dever podcast. So that's one thing.
So AI is one topic. I know that we've had several people.
There you go.
So you could make an AI episode. How long would you make it? How long would you suggest making
I think I'd let the answers dictate, and so again, you don't have to put yourself in too much of a box to start with. See if there's four guests that all spoke to AI in some way, and then see what their answers are and listen to how they marry together. And then you can decide whether or not trim even more, but I would just start with that and just see what you have. And so then you have a, Sam Dever's guest take on AI or something like that. And there could be, I don't know.
Yeah. And do you think it'd be something to film like an intro for? Like, hey guys, this is a quick compilation of talking AI. If you're tuning in for the first time, links to all the full episodes in the description.
Totally.
Like
yeah.
that.
I mean, I think guiding the listener definitely
to explain what they're about to see.
That's right.
Hey, these are shorter versions of a way longer episode. Each one of these people had their own. It's a great idea, actually. I love that.
And so as you're talking both to your regular listener as well as a potential new listener who hasn't discovered it yet, and so because you're also guiding the regular listener through the fact that you're trying something new, and just so you know, I mean, here's what we're trying here. We've had amazing guests on the show, and they all had a perspective on AI. We thought you might really appreciate it all kind of packaged together, something along those lines. And then, I'm sure that there's several other subjects that could be explored that way.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think really the main thing would just have to be to film the ending and outro to it.
Right.
And maybe even do like a little short outro, like, hey guys, thanks for tuning in.
Totally.
Again, you can watch the full episodes of all these individuals you saw here.
That's right.
Or listen to.
Just toss them to the right places where you want them to go. And
yeah. Wow.
One guide, what were you gonna say, Eric?
No.
Sorry. One guide to look at. The reason I thought about this is Mark Maron published a book and I don't know if I'd be surprised if it was an audiobook, but I think it was a hard copy book, a print book, where they did just that, where an editor publisher went in and they organized topics, and then they had different Mark Maron guests and their takes on those topics, and so that could be something just to kind of see how they did that. But you've got it. I mean, you don't have to buy Maron's book, but it's like that was a super smart way to take, hundreds of hours of audio and repackage it for new content for a new listener and even for regular listeners, because I can be scrolling through the Sam Dever feed and all of a sudden see, oh, wow. Oh, I could I'm kind of interested in AI, or I've been trying to do some research. I don't know. I don't know why, what the use case would be, but like that could be a really something interesting to explore.
Yeah, no, my wheels are already
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
turning with that.
And it just gives you, it gives you some latitude. Cause I love how you are not trying to take the 20-minute thing, and that's totally fine. That's still industry. That's, I will recommend my clients 20 minutes. A lot of times my clients are big corporations and they're trying to like fit they've got a different audience, different thing. But that doesn't mean that the long form is not doing this. Like we're all watching long form return again, especially on YouTube. Yeah. So the fact that you're there was really smart when you got that up there 4 years ago or so, or whenever you launched.
Yeah, that's really been the focus. Like we're still there. I got to discipline myself not to check the YouTube as much, but yeah, it's one of the first things I check. Okay, we get any subscribers, and some days it's like you get a few, and then some days it goes down. You're like, dang it,
I know.
But it's like the stock market almost. But we're at.
I think that's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. It's best not to check every day. It's better to check infrequently.
Yeah.
But can you do that, Sam? Do you have the balls to not seriously to not check it every day? I mean that I don't even know if I can do it.
I think because we're trying to hit 1,000. We were at 709. Now we're at 708. Maybe after this it'll be up again. But 1,000 gets you, to that.
Right.
A lot of creators I've talked to said that's the hardest to get to that first 1,000. Again, it's a broad show. It's not really, it's niched, but it's not. So for YouTube purposes, if someone sees a finance person that's going to be teaching you finance tips, they know what that channel is going to be about. They're clicking in. Whereas with this, maybe someone really did like listening to a filmmaker, but then we bring on someone completely out of that world and be like, well, I thought this was about filmmaking. What's this?
Right.
So it's a longer, I think it was Lewis Holmes that said, he does School of Greatness. He said when he was starting out, people told him like, hey, if you want to blow up quick, do a niche. And he goes, no, I want to go broad. And he goes, they told him, it's going to take a lot longer. And he said something, be prepared to do this for 5 years and not make a dime off of it. So, but to your point, I think maybe there's a way to come up with these micro niches.
Yeah.
Because I'm a big believer in the long form, because a lot of times the good stuff doesn't start rolling until
100%.
We're halfway through. But what about those people that would still want to listen to this? They just want it in those shorter bites,
correct.
Those smaller bites.
I think the smaller bite, the entry points, you allow someone to just get a feel of it without feeling like they have to invest. Cause it is, it can be intimidating to look and see, oh my God, when's the good stuff going to start? You have to be very honest about the listening patterns of humans. I mean, that's just the truth. So if you did have smaller bites, shorter bites that were focused in one way or another, it could, again, what's wonderful about the medium and about what you're doing is that you can test as much as you want. I mean, it's gonna come down to your own bandwidth and your own capacity. And that's why when I began making the suggestion, I was like, this is gonna be more work. So just, unfortunately, I wish there was a better way around it, but
everything's work.
But it could be, it could allow you to test a little bit and just see if you get, if you start getting numbers on some of those episodes that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, or it can allow you to dictate the kind of strategy that you're doing, and even you could think about your guest in a slightly more nuanced way as well, and nothing changes about what you're great at and about your dedication to the long form. So you obviously still maintain that, maintain the mission that you're on. It's just, you've got a couple of different side things that you could play with.
Yeah. And I think too, another way, I mean, just moving forward, knowing the type of guests coming up, like, okay, for this 3 guests, 4 guests, we can ask this question. For this 3, 4, we can ask this
That's
question.
right.
There's 2 episodes right there. Yeah, no, I get where you're going with that. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't know, try it. And
Yeah,
it
no.
may also may not work, you know. So that's the reality, is that it may, you know, you may not see much of a difference, or you may listen and go, this doesn't really still get the thing I'm trying to put out there, you know, because what I wouldn't want you to do is to compromise your like your mission, and compromise like your voice and what it is you're attempting to accomplish. So that's just something.
Thank you. And I'm coming from you, and I definitely want to get back to you when you're ready.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not
no,
deflected.
This is great.
I'm not deflected. It was more just kind of like, wow, it was popping in my head.
And, you know, because going through, again, your your informational email about yourself and what you do for me was stellar. Like, just as I knew some of those things, but some I'm like, well, he did what? So I guess when you're telling your background, so I guess we left off, you were doing the radio thing in North Carolina.
That's right.
So what led you from there? Can you take us, how'd you get out west?
How did I get out west?
And into podcasting?
Great. So there is a bridge. And when I was in North Carolina, I was on staff at a radio station, and I was doing all of these really creative, interesting stories about color and culture and food. And I did a moonshine story, and like I did all these just kind of offbeat, human interest, kind of quirky stories that I was doing on the radio. And so I left the station and moved to Atlanta. And at that time, my now wife, but she and I were deciding, okay, we weren't married yet, and we were deciding, all right, we're gonna meet up in Atlanta, and this is kind of where we're gonna start our life together. We dated for a while, and then, but like 2012 was the year we were gonna just launch. Essentially, we were just gonna like commit, go all in. And so I moved to Atlanta without a job, and tried to get a radio job, and I couldn't get on staff at the local stations there. And so I ended up getting a job at a public relations agency. So I was on staff there, but I still had the radio bug, and I was still just, I mean, it was as if I had just kind of gotten started in radio, and then I took a detour off the interstate. And so at nights and on weekends, I began to put together what would become my first podcast, which was a show called Authentic South. And it was truly just like a storytelling style podcast, where each episode was either done the way that you might hear a public radio story is done, or it was a longer form interview. But essentially, what I wanted to do is I wanted to tell the stories of what I thought were the most interesting and genuine Southerners. And at this time, again, 2012, there was Paula Deen was kind of the poster person for the South. And when people talked about Southern food or Southern culture, I would often hear, disparaging remarks made about Southerners, and the thing that I knew after having grown up there my whole life was that the South was a lot more complex and a lot more nuanced, and had a lot more rich culture and stories to offer than just Paula Deen and fried chicken and butter, And so I wanted to tell those stories. I wanted to go out and talk about Southerners that I knew, that I had met, or that I thought were interesting, and get them in front of whatever audience I could get them in front of. Because obviously I thought, well, with the podcast, I don't know who's going to discover it, but it has a lot more potential than, if I were just going to try to do one story for one radio station. And so in that particular show, in order to tell stories about interesting Southerners, one of the episodes, which is one of my favorites, is about this guy named Little G. Weevil. Little G Weevil is a blues musician, and he sounds like he came right through the bayou of Louisiana. He's got this really rich voice and this accent, this drawl when he's singing that just sounds really uh, uh, full of just like Louisiana gumbo and hot sauce. But the truth is that Little G Weevil is actually from Hungary. He's from Budapest. His name is Gabor Such, and he moved to the United States when he was young because he wanted to be a blues musician. He had listened to John Lee Hooker on vinyl and fell in love with the blues as this kid in Budapest. And he decided that his goal, his mission in life was to play on Beale Street in Memphis. And so that particular episode just tells the story of Little G Weevil. And I did a great interview with him, but it was more just what his belief was and how he got to America and then how he eventually got to Memphis. And I just thought, Little G Weevil, as crazy as this sounds, is as Southern as I am. And that was kind of my premise. I was wanting to upend the idea that Southerners only looked and sounded and acted in a certain way. I really wanted to show that the South was super interesting and diverse and had a lot of complexity to it. And so over about almost 25 episodes, I was just telling all these Southern stories, and it was the thrill of my life, and it was so much fun. And I was working my ass off and still had the full-time job and was just like going off on the weekend. I'd drive around I found story ideas, and I would just go to where that story was and immerse myself in it like I did when I was a travel writer. And it was hard. God, it was hard. I also, at this time, getting back to just kind of teaching, what we have to do sometimes to teach ourselves, I kind of knew what a podcast was, and I knew how to make radio stories. But as far as distribution was concerned, as far as how to like literally get the audio that I was making up on some kind of a platform so that people besides just my mom and my, fiance could listen to it, I could not figure out, or I had to figure out how to do that. I had to do that on my own, and it was not easy. There were all these barriers, and it was just nothing like it is now. But I just thought, why else am I doing this? I got to fight through, I got to push through and do it. And so that just took me in a completely different direction. I was still working in radio, still working in this medium, but I began to just think like, I can make things that are bigger than me, and I have the ability to still teach myself how to learn the next step and how to get up to the next rung and how to really get to that next level. I just have to put the work in, and I just have to just take it on. The other thing that I did for that show was I had a vision in my mind about what the music might sound like. I knew that I wanted some original theme music, but I'm not a musician, love music, but I've never played an instrument. And so I found a couple of buddies of mine who were musicians, and I paid them pennies essentially. And they were so generous and willing to help me out and say, all right, we'll compose the theme song and we'll help you, get these transitions and these stingers and these other elements. And I was effectively art directing them, or whatever the equivalent might be, producing kind of, but I was giving them a lot of inspiration. And I said, I kind of want it to sound like this with a little bit of this, and I like this with a little bit of that. And they went into a studio and they came out, and it was perfect. It was more than I could have imagined. And again, like I didn't know what I was doing. But I was just like, come up with a theme song, figure out a way to do a theme song that is genuine and tied to this particular program. And all of those things started coming together, And so I published it, and then I found a new platform that at the time, it allowed you to post your episodes up there. and it would allow public radio stations all over the country to license those episodes if they wanted. If they were trying to fill their programming schedule, maybe it was like a, you know, two in the morning and they had basically a dead air, or they had something they needed to fill, they could go up and license those episodes of that particular podcast at the time, and it would get aired on, you know, these public radios. So like this podcast that I was just kind of throwing up first on SoundCloud and then eventually got up on Apple, it was being heard all over the country. I would get an email notification that would say, "Oh, well, you know, New Hampshire Public Radio has licensed the Little G Weevil episode," and you know, and I was just getting these notes and just going, "This is wild that I can do this, or that this is happening with this thing," and it was all just step by step. It was truly just, what if this happened? What if I tried this, or what if I did that, or and it was such a, at this time, the stakes for me weren't so high. And so I did have the ability to just like try different things and take some chances and, you know, keep going in the direction where my instinct was taking me, you know? And so that was another one of the important things, was like, I just kept having these instincts and I would just keep following them, and they kept being right. You know, they were just, or at least it was right for me, you know? And so that was amazing. So that was just like this wonderful 2012, 2013 period where I'd put this thing together I'd never thought that I could do. And now I'm like stepping off into the world.
That's awesome about the licensing thing.
I know.
Do they still do that? Is that still a thing?
Possibly. It was through PRX, Public Radio Exchange, and I am not sure if they do. I'm not even sure if PRX, I think PRX is still around, but there's been a lot of acquisitions and or merging. You know, there's a lot of things that happen. I don't know, but it's a good question. It's a good question.
And so from there, so you're in Atlanta, you do that show.
Right. So getting to the West. So my wife, Jennifer, and I in 2014 decided we were ready to have a big adventure. And she had already lived in the Bay Area a couple of different times, actually, and her brother lived out there as well. She had fallen in love with San Francisco. She actually moved from San Francisco to Birmingham to take a job at the magazine, which is how I met her originally. And so after being in the South for, I don't know, let's see, 6-7 years, she was like, you know, let's have a big adventure. And I said, I'm ready. I'm ready to go try something new. I'd lived in the South my whole life, in Alabama and Georgia and North Carolina, and I was ready to try something different. I'd traveled to California a lot and loved it and always connected out here. And I just thought, yeah, let's do it. And so we packed everything up and we moved to the Bay Area. We got a place in Oakland, bought a place in Oakland, and we just landed there and started our California life together, essentially. And that was 10 years ago. And was in Oakland for about 6 years. I worked in a tech PR agency for a while, and about 2018 left that agency, and that's when I started, when Jen and I started Ingredient, which is the agency that we have now, that we've had for the last 6 years or so. But 2020 came around and we decided to like have adventure number 2. And it was middle of the pandemic. About the summer of 2020, we'd been talking about whether or not we were going to sell our place. And we thought, you know what, who knows what's going to happen? Everyone was incredibly frightened, and we didn't know what would happen with the housing market, anything like that. We just said, let's just go for it. And we were either going to go to New York or Los Angeles. And we did all of these pro-con lists. I mean, we had like a spreadsheet matrix full of all of the reasons to be in one place or the other. And we deliberated over that decision for months and months and months. And finally we said, all right, let's make it Los Angeles. And so October 2020, we moved from Oakland to Los Angeles. It was crazy. It was a crazy time. Everything's obviously shut down, as you
Yeah.
remember.
It was nuts,
It was
especially
nuts.
here. Yeah.
It was nuts. And, but it was another one of those things, just going for it.
Was there one deciding? I know there were several, but was there one thing that pushed you guys over the edge to come to LA? Aside from weather, of course.
The weather, of course. I think space. I think also we are very close to her brother and his family up in the Bay Area. So there were like a combination of being near enough to them, within either
Day
5-6 hour
trip, yeah.
drive or a very short flight, or the weather, obviously. And I think ultimately, as we were looking at, because we're not young, we were looking at, all right, we would land in New York and we'd be in a small place, and that's okay too. But like our life was just in a different place. So I think that combination of that, we also have a lot of friends down here. So at the time we were thinking that was one of the major, looking at our social communities in either place. And we have a lot of friends in New York as well, but we were looking at the respective communities and going, okay, good. Either place we're going to be great because we've got a built-in set of friends and people in our network that we can, connect with pretty soon.
And did you guys have a studio up in Oakland?
We did,
So-
yeah. Jen had a studio
Okay.
that was smaller than Ingredient Studios, but it's she had a studio there, and we let that one go, and then decided to come down.
So I guess in New York, would you have tried to do the same thing that you're doing here? And I guess it's a double question.
Yeah.
And then is LA better for renting it out for film production companies, doing your own productions? Like,
I think that's right. I think part of the plan would have been, you're right, would have probably been to try to do a studio in either place, and it made more sense here. Yeah.
it's a beautiful studio.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Again, I'm going to go.
That's Jen. That's my wife. She designed the whole space. When we got it end of 2021, it was just a big white box. And she's a food director and a food photographer. So primarily what she's doing is she's directing commercials for food brands like Starbucks and Amy's Kitchen and, just big food brands. And so she knew that she needed to design a space that would be conducive for doing food productions and food shoots and things like that. And so she's an amazing person and an amazing director and an amazing designer, because she came in and she just put together, okay, this is what we're going to need to make this come to life. And so that's all her. She would just give me lists of things to do, and then I would, help where I could, when I could.
Yeah. And you guys, and so with the studios, then you have all the photography, the videography, the branding stuff, like, making the pitch decks, things.
That's
like
right.
You're like, man, they're a full out marketing team right there.
We are. Yeah. It's really what we try to do is we're like a creative agency to help a brand or a company or an organization tell its story better. And you can do that with video, you can do that with photography, you can do that with graphic design or podcasting. And so all of our respective, Jen was a journalist as well. She worked in PR. She's obviously a photographer. So the two of us for the agency itself really bring all the things that we've done in our career into this particular thing, And so it's it's exciting and interesting, and it's entrepreneurial, and it's, frightening as hell. I mean, it's all of those things every single day, all of the emotions, the motion, the spikes, and it's all happening every single day. But it's really fulfilling, because at the end of the day, it's like when I sit down in a meeting, or when I'm finally like getting to work with the clients that we're working with, I'm really just telling their stories, and I'm thinking about, all right, how would my Uncle Frankie do this? Like, what would be the right hook to get this audience in? Because that's what Frankie would do it like that. He would come up with this hook that's just like, you cannot turn away from. He would say, there'd be one line the beginning line that's just, it makes your head swivel. You're like, what? And the next thing you know, you're bam, writing the story. And we do that every day with the clients that we're working with. We're just like, all right, you're telling me a lot of different things here, but let's focus down on what's that one thing that's really going to get that audience attention, what's going to make them really interested and lean in and stop whatever they're doing, they're scrolling, their distraction, and actually go, wait, I want to hear what these people are trying to tell me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just your story, like starting from before social media and smartphones and all that, just on the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
Magazines, like real magazines.
Right. I know.
To now,
I know.
doing what you're doing, but the concept's the same, right? It's just all about the storytelling.
It's all about the storytelling. It really is. It's the other thing in the first part of my career as a travel writer. One of the things to that was, for the most part, I would travel incognito, and that was the way we were trying our best to get the most pure experience, so that the reader, because the reader, if they decided to book a room at this hotel, or make a reservation at this restaurant, or go to that beach or whatever, we would want them to have the genuine kind of experience. And so I wouldn't call ahead and say, I'm coming to your restaurant, I'm going to be reviewing it or whatever. I would just make a reservation as myself, and I would just come in and, have a table of one. And what that experience, one of the many, many things that I learned in that job, was just the power of observation and the power of listening. And one of the things, I'll toggle this back over to you, but one of the things that I've been able to recognize in what you're doing with the show is the power that you have as a listener. You said earlier that you are a talker, and I totally understand what you mean. You've also allowed the people who've come in and sat in this seat, you've given them just, like, what a gift to give somebody the ear and the attention and the focus that you're giving people. And so I know that you feel it. I know that you feel, as people are responding and opening up to you, how powerful that is, because as someone in this chair, I can feel it. I can feel myself, opening up, and I genuinely think that you're listening, and that's something that, in the first part of my job, first part of my career, I had to really kind of hone that in. And it's something now, 20, 25 years later, it's what I do every day. It is such an integrated part of what I'm doing all the time. And, it was just it's all kind of a big circle, it's all coming back around. It's really great.
I love it. No, and thank you for that. No, Eric and I, we always say people get energized in the chair.
Yeah.
So we call it the chair.
Yeah.
I've said it many times. I think that is a strength he has. I think that's what made Oprah so successful. She could get people to open up because she's just such a fantastic listener. I think Sam's definitely got that quality. I think that's one of his biggest strengths. So yeah, I agree.
And actually, another thing I gotta give Tanner credit for, when you met us, you gave the note
Right.
about Eric. You're like, yeah, he needs to have a mic. He needs to be, a part of the show. Like, you guys need to lean into that, because I think we had just started playing with it a little bit.
Yeah.
Shout out to Kenny Yates. He was like the first one when Eric was talking, like, took his phone.
Oh, right.
But oh my God, I just
That's
got
great.
goosebumps. Yeah, because it's about that thing, right? You had your little iPod with the microphone. That's what it was like. And then another guest, our next guest, came on. She did the same thing. And then so I ended up doing it an episode. I'm like, well, yeah, he just needs to have a camera set up.
Right.
I mean, you mean this extra camera's just sitting here? I can just turn it on. Yeah, problem solved.
But yeah, it's following, like you said, like that intuition. Like, you don't
That's
know
right.
what you're doing, but you
Yeah.
kind of do, but you just keep doing it.
Right.
Action. I'm reading a book right now. It's over there, but it's J.D. Rockefeller's letters to his son.
Mm.
Fascinating.
Wow.
Really fascinating. And he it's just dropping knowledge to his son. But one of the things he's talking about is like action.
Yeah.
He's like those who, and I just heard a saying the other day, life's like quicksand. You keep moving or you sink type of thing. So it's like this game of, you got to be smart, but you also, when you do get these little hunches and hints, it's about trusting yourself.
Yeah.
And trusting that, no, I think that could work. I think it's at least worth a try.
It's at least worth a try.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's no harm. Like you might have done a handful of episodes and Eric might have been like, I don't have to contribute. And then it'd been okay, and you moved on. But I think that starting it is one thing. And now, I mean, it's just, I mean, think about Howard Stern. And if you went back and listened, not necessarily like there's the whole satellite of performers around, that he would have. But if it was just like, if you were just focusing in on the Howard and Robin dynamic, like that it's as classic as entertainment, like it goes back, I don't know, centuries maybe, but it definitely goes back to like vaudeville and, the old entertainment where you just have the two people to play off of each other, and I think so. That was one of the things I wrote. I wanted to ask the two of you about.
Sure.
Is that when you think about, and it's all kind of around this idea of voice, like the Sam voice and the Eric voice. And the more that you kind of listen to what each of you are bringing into each episode, how could you define the Sam voice and how could you define the Eric voice, and putting some kind of word around that can just allow you to, it gives it a foundation and it gives you something to just kind of think about. And so in every single interview, you can then be thinking, okay, am I bringing the Sam voice is my own genuine voice to this? Am I not bringing my Sam voice to this? That's part of just getting more and more comfortable and aware of, who you are and what your voice is bringing to the program itself, So that's one thing. It's not a solution. It's more just kind of like something to think about as you guys keep growing and you keep like, evolving, because you've absolutely evolved. And then sometimes in real time.
I have piggybacking off everything. That was great. Thank you. And I've heard other people say this too with Eric's dynamic. I feel like Eric's almost like the viewer in a sense. And a lot of times, a question he may ask, maybe something that someone at home was wondering.
Exactly.
Because, most of the time, sometimes it's mutual people we both know equally as well. Maybe he even knows them better than I do. But a lot of times it's people I mainly know, but then we introduce each other. So I feel like his perspective has a lot of value for people. And it also, I got to know too, it said that it breaks the episode up since it is long form. Mm-hmm. It gives like everyone like, oh, it's someone else chiming in type of thing. So it makes it not so it's just like, it's like, oh, we got a fresh voice on it.
I like to challenge people too. It's like, Sam as the host, obviously he's got to be very encouraging. And I don't think he has too much runway to be challenging the guests. Then all of a sudden it becomes like, whoa, this is a tense environment. But it's cool for me to be like, well, hey, and I have enough taste to do it like politely and be like, oh, I don't understand that. Could you rephrase that? Or kind of just challenge whatever the point of view is. I feel like that's kind of my obligation.
See, you've already defined it.
Yeah.
Like this is great.
We've talked about
You're already
this.
kind of talking through it. That's great.
This is a great exercise.
I love it.
And then I was going to tell you about with my voice.
Yeah.
Two things real quick on this. So first of all, as a podcaster, you think you know certain things in your mind, or you think you have an opinion on something,
right?
Until you actually start to articulate. This happened more than once. I thought I knew about something, or I thought I felt a certain way, but then I started talking it out loud on the microphone with somebody, and I realized like I don't really know what I'm talking about, or I don't really feel as strongly as I thought I did on that.
Oh, that's
so that's just been interesting. And two, I've brought this up a couple of times. Tyler James White, who was on, he had this is before he even came on the podcast. He goes, because we were talking about actors and how they don't like to watch themselves on film. He's like, yeah, that's tough with what you do, because it's the Sam Dever podcast. That's not an actor.
You can't hide.
That's you.
Yeah, right.
So I've become numb now to my own self-editing, for better or for worse. But it's just been an interesting.
Was it really hard at the beginning?
Yeah, in the beginning. And there's been some episodes come up from like, oh God, I don't like how I responded to that, or I didn't like how just that turned out, or I have a better answer for that, but that's the way
I see. Yeah.
So, but again, repetition. Now I'm numb to it. Now cameras are on, good, let's go. Like I don't even feel it anymore. Like it's like these could be on or off right now, and we'd be having this same exact. Which I think is the point of long form
100%
podcasting.
Yeah. And more importantly, back to what we talked about earlier, it's your own growth and confidence.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely an element of, you're not worried about it anymore, but there's like an underlying strength that's there now, where and I may be putting words in your mouth and you tell me, but it could be that you've realized that if you don't have the perfect quippy response or the perfectly articulated, sentence that just distills everything down, it's okay, for lots of different reasons, including that you're not a robot, you're not a machine, you didn't train, you weren't training an answer to give for whatever question was going to come up. So, I mean, I think that's a testament to just being more comfortable in your voice and more comfortable with, with what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Yeah. And I think another, thank you for all this, by the way. I'm so glad you took notes, because this is great. This is great to have someone who's very experienced in the industry to come in and be like, okay, you guys ever thought of this? Have you thought of that?
And I was a little hesitant because I didn't want to I wanted to come in like true generosity and just be like, I didn't want to come in and say, let me tell you all the things that, like, as
you
if,
can gut it, yeah.
So, but that's not, but the point was not to gut it. The point was truly just like, I'm a fan, and I'm a fan especially of just anybody that is putting themselves out there and, going after something that, you weren't trained to do this. There's a lot of your skills that have now coalesced into what make the Sam Dever podcast, both of you. But there's now like, you keep going for it. You keep going for it. And I'm just like, I love being around people that go for it and that are, not afraid to try something, even if even when there's not a guarantee that it's gonna, do exactly what it is they want to do. It's just that's what was inspiring when we met the first night. And I'm glad that we stayed in touch, and it's just I meet a lot of people in Los Angeles, just like you do. And I meet a lot of great people. And that's one of the reasons that I'm happy that I'm here, is because a lot of people here are genuinely going for something that they believe in, and it's not always going to work. And who knows if we connect in 5 years where either one of us are going to be, but it's just like, there's something very inspiring about that, So anyway, that's why I brought the notebook.
That's a clip right there. So now when I talk to people, like I already have the editor in my mind. So I'm like, that's going to be one right there. That might be the intro. I don't know, but so it was great.
I know.
But I feel the same way about Los Angeles. You can come up with 10,000 reasons not to be here, but at the end of the day, the weather, obviously, but it's the great one to be here. But it's just the energy. It's the people. And that's what I've just accepted and realized. And the more I go out to all these different networking events now, it's just insane how many people are out here. And to your point too, so many people are trying.
Correct. Yeah.
Many may not come to fruition, but at least they're trying.
That's right.
And I think it is very important to surround yourself with that energy.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot of this is just mental too. Mm-hmm. It's such a mental game, entrepreneurship and just navigating, doing creative things. But I feel LA is the one place where it's like, come, our arms are open. We accept you. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Like, I always say this, but someone can be an engineer or an accountant during the day, but they're a pop artist, whatever,
right.
at night. And and no one blinks an eye.
That's right.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just like, and everyone's an actor. So
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I love being around that because I'm like, yeah, well, this just makes total sense to be here.
It does.
It's really Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory here. You know, you think it, you can make it. So we covered your podcast journey.
Yeah.
Is there any other things that in your notes or anything that you wanted to bring to the table, whether it's with us or with your own stuff that you wanted to share?
I think so. I'll summarize kind of where we are now, because I do think that's good. After we moved to California, to the Bay Area, the way that I got into podcasting and branded podcasting is through, there was a movie called Harriet, a biopic that came out about Harriet Tubman. It came out in 2019. And so all of that movie was filmed in the state of Virginia. And so the Virginia State Tourism Office, they're the folks behind Virginia is for Lovers, that tagline. They wanted somehow to figure out how to promote the fact that the film had been filmed there in Virginia. And Harriet, for a time, actually lived in the state of Virginia. She grew up in Maryland, but she lived in Virginia for a time before finally, moving up to the Northeast. And so, essentially, I pitched them. I just said, what if we did a podcast about the life of Harriet Tubman? Now, while I had done a storytelling podcast in 2012, I had never made a podcast for a company. I had never done it in that way. I knew how it could be made, and I had a vision for it. But again, I was crossing over this threshold of, there would be a 1,000 reasons for me to just say, you know what, I've never really done this before. I don't need to put this out there. I don't need to, move forward with this. But in this instance, it was like, I know that I can make this podcast for these guys. And they went for it. And they said, this sounds great. It's going to be we'll invest in this. We'll make a short series. And the woman I mentioned earlier from Birmingham, who gave me the shot, who gave me the chance to do one radio story for her, Tanya Hott, when I had pitched and they were going to greenlight this series for about Harriet Tubman, I called Tanya and I said, I want to hire you to be the writer and producer on this show. I need somebody like you, because she's a legend and she's so great at what she does. Such a great storyteller, such a great reporter, like just amazing, amazing person. And so it was so fun to be able to just reconnect with her and in a very small way, basically say to her, look, you've allowed me to get to this point in my life and my career. Like, you gave me a shot, and the least that I can do is hire you on this project. And she loved it. We worked really well together, and we're collaborators on bringing this series to life. And so it is just that. It's a narrative, nonfiction documentary style series about the life of Harriet. It's also about the life of 19th century African Americans, people who were enslaved at the time. And so we were really just like painting this very real picture of what was going on at that time, the time of Harriet. And so that particular podcast, we published it in November of 2019. And it coincided again with that movie that came out. And so then we had modest downloads, modest listenership. It was kind of like, that was a great project. We're all really happy we did it. We didn't really know if it would do that great or not, but it was kind of like, this is kind of a legacy style podcast. It will always be up there. It'll always be out for people to listen to. And in February, March of 2020, as we all now know, we were getting ready to enter the pandemic. Apple actually featured the show. Like they put it on their noteworthy, essentially the homepage of the Apple Podcast app. They featured it as a show that people should pay attention to. It was completely unexpected. We didn't know that was going to happen. And it was kind of like putting a billboard in Times Square. And all of a sudden, all of our numbers spiked. Everything went out the roof. And because it was trending so fast, so much at that time, Apple not only had featured it there, but in the trending categories of podcasting, it started to move up the ranks. And so I don't know if they still do it this way with Apple Podcasts. They might, but instead of being just a pure top 10 shows based on number of downloads, they really do feature in that top 10, top 50, top 100. They feature shows that move. So if your show is showing some kind of a trajectory, then it's going to get noted in the top 10 list. And so because our trajectory was so steep and so many listeners were coming on board, we actually started climbing through the ranks, and we got as high as number 12 overall of all podcasts. And I like we were ahead of like Dax Shepard and in his show, which was just wild. That allowed us to regroup everything that we were doing from a business standpoint and reframe what we'd been talking about. At the time, we were doing photography and video, and it was a very, we thought that was going to be the direction. And when this thing happened, all of a sudden it was like podcasting as a business is where we need to take our company. And that's exactly what we did. And, in the spring of 2020, and that show then opened so many doors for us. We were able to get many more clients, and other companies started coming to us just because of the notoriety we had. And we've now built this successful business on telling stories about companies or organizations or people. We were fortunate enough, after the Following Harriet show, we developed the United States Civil Rights Trail podcast, which tells the most significant stories from the civil rights movement. Some of them are very well known, and many of them are lesser known. And it's archival sound from people who lived then. We also have been able to find living people who are still alive who were foot soldiers in the movement at the time, and so it has an oral history element to it, as well as a newsy element to it, and it just kind of brings together the civil rights stories that happened then and why it's so important for us in 2024, 25, and beyond to just remember how relevant that is for us right now. And so that's now what I do. It's now like I am an executive podcast producer, and every single day I'm doing that. And it's very, I love it. It's very fulfilling, and it brings together all of everything that I had, done in my career. I'm still using all of those things in one way or another. And it's just, it's so much fun. I'm having a real blast with it. It's really exciting, which is how I got a podcast movement, which is how I met you.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how it all happened.
Exactly.
No, and they're all, I got a chance to go through and can you talk about the Cutting Carbon one, the one with GE? That was another one
totally.
that you guys have?
One of our bigger shows is a show called Cutting Carbon, and we work with GE, GE Vernova. They wanted to create a podcast that takes a look at how they address decarbonization, how the technologies that they have and that they're developing and they're aware of in the energy industry, how they are dealing with decarbonization and climate change. And they're talking about all of those big topics on the show. people inside of GE host the show. So a couple of gentlemen that are, leaders in the industry are the hosts, and then they'll bring on other subject matter experts so that they interview them about their respective subjects. And so we trained the hosts and got them set up and basically did a long boot camp with them on how to make a podcast. And so we now work with them each season. They've done 9 seasons, and we get them all set up, and they record, and we work on the edit, and we go through all that kind of stuff with them. And it's just that's been one of our signature clients that when we started the show in a similar way with the Following Harriet program, I set the expectations fairly modest and fairly low, frankly. And I just said, look, I said, this is a niche podcast and it's a niche subject, and your audience is going to be small, but your audience is going to be mighty. They're going to be really interested in what it is you are trying to talk about and what it is the intelligence, the information, everything you're conveying. I said, so let's just think, all right, let's say if we get 5,000 downloads, not even 5,000 listeners, but 5,000 downloads, that's going to be just goal number one. And everybody was okay with that because we all felt, really great about it. And they're now on, oh gosh, I'm going to misquote, but I think we've passed 200,000 downloads, and they've got like 65,000 listeners.
Wow.
And again, it's like, these are 65,000 people that are really into this particular subject. There's not a casual listener that's coming to Cutting Carbon. These people are genuinely dialed in to this subject, to this industry, to what they're doing. And so it's a testament to what message they're putting out there. I mean, we certainly helped with that, and we've been a big part of their show, but they had a really strong message, and they knew that there were people out there that wanted to hear it, and I have to do it. Like, I have to circle back to the Sam Dever podcast, because I think that's part of what I meant earlier, where it's like there's an audience that is listening to you and that is listening to the guests that you bring on the show, and we're looking and we're listening for something, and I think that there's going to be something in there, because you've got a niche audience, and that niche audience is going to keep coming back because you keep investing in yourself,
Yeah, no, and congratulations on all of that.
Thank you.
It's inspiring, it's motivating, and also just gets you thinking like, man, think about how many other companies and people could have podcasts.
Oh yeah. No, yeah.
And like you said, I mean, not everyone needs to be number one downloads or whatever. The company like GE or major company, they're good.
Right.
A lot of them are good. That this is something supplemental that they can do to add to their brand.
That's right.
To educate, there's so many, and they have the luxury of like, hey, we can produce this, and there's no pressure to turn it into. We can make it exactly how we want to make it.
That's
if that
right.
makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, that's how we work with them, and how we work with a lot of companies. Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is spectacular. Well, Tanner, I'm sure we could talk for 4 more hours.
I know.
Is there anything else you personally had, or anything else you wanted to shout out?
I don't think so. I don't think so. No, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
One final question I had for you. What do you think the future of podcasting is?
In the short term, it really is video. And, you very wisely started there. And I can't tell you, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of it, but there are millions and millions of shows that are not utilizing video at all. They're still relying on audio. And so in the short term, I'd say in the next 1 to 3 years, if you do not have a video element to your podcast, you're not going to be discovered. And it's got a lot to do with a lot of different factors. One, including the audience, which is way younger than we are, but the audience that is coming on to podcasting is using YouTube as if it were a television network, or as if it were it's their primary way of consuming media. And so there are more, the people that are 13 to 34 right now are listening they're listening to spoken word audio for almost I think a quarter of their day now. 23% of their day is spoken word audio, and the primary source is YouTube. And so that's not news to you. It's not something that you're obviously in this and on this, but that to me is a major part of my day-to-day conversation with companies, is trying to get them onto YouTube. And so in that sense, I'm not only thinking about how current YouTube podcasts work that look like the Sam Dever podcast. This is with the majority of shows. I'm trying to think about the next iteration of video podcasting, how it's going to look, how it's going to sound, how it's going to be perhaps different than what we have currently now, which is kind of like a television show, where there's a host, there's a guest, there's a co-host, that kind of thing. And so that's where my head keeps going, because video is only going to increase. Everybody's going to set up the 2 mics, 3 cameras. What's after that? Where can we try to create something that looks and sounds a little different on the other side of that setup? So that's the short term. Big picture future of podcasting, I'm not sure. For a long time, I had this idea, or I had this theory, and had this instinct about podcasting moving less away from a listener observing 2 people having a conversation, and more to the speaker really speaking directly to the listener. That kind of like the way you might imagine a meditation app works, where someone is speaking directly to you, and because of what they're saying and how they're saying it, it sounds like they are really talking to you. It's not just they're talking to the vast void, and you happen to be catching what they're saying. And so somehow I don't know if that's ever gonna pop, but I've always had this. I've got a lot of ideas with that particular format in mind. So I don't know. I think we're gonna keep adopting more and more. The one thing when it comes to, because I have a travel background, we work with a lot of tourist destinations. We work with to make podcasts for them. I think one of the new technologies that will radically change podcasting, at least for that kind, will be something that has to do with geolocation, where you might land in Chicago, and all of a sudden, if you open up your podcast listening app, it's going to say, "Oh, you're in Chicago? Did you know that these 3 podcasts are all about Chicago architecture, or the Chicago dining scene, or the Chicago art? Click here and listen. Listen now that we know that you're in Chicago." And so that's used in other industries. It's used in retail all the time. I think that there's going to be somehow that we're going to figure out how to connect a listener with a podcast that is relevant to them where they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like a For You page.
Yeah,
on
that's exactly
Instagram
right.
or that.
That's exactly
they're
right.
going to know your data. They're going to know your habits. They're going to see, oh, this guy's in Chicago. We know he loves sports.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, here's the Chicago sports
That's
podcast.
exactly right.
Yeah.
It'll analyze what you've listened to. It's going to analyze what they know about you, and then have the location be that next data point. And all of a sudden, they're like, bam. Are you interested in the history of the Chicago Cubs? Whatever the show might be. And so I'm always thinking about things like that, and how to get where to be at that point when the industry starts to shift that way. So that's I don't know. I'm not sure where it's going to go, though.
I'll just contribute to this conversation. I think I said it once on here, but you have a chair right here. People put on a VR headset.
Yeah.
They're sitting right with us at the table. I'm sure if someone's maybe attempted that by now, but
no,
yeah,
I think that's
endless.
great. Yeah, like a VR.
Yeah. So this was spectacular,
experience.
my friend.
Yeah, man.
Eric, do you have any final thoughts, questions, ideas?
No, man, thanks. I think it'd be funny to have a clip. It's like podcast consultant consults me on my podcast, like during my podcast, like, and we can clip like a 20 to 30 minute clip there. Right. There you go. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're gonna clip this thing.
We're gonna radically change the Sam Dever podcast. That's basically all I wanted to do. I wanted to come in and just blow it all up. Yeah.
But you know what?
Turn over the apple carts.
I'm open. I mean, I actually view you as an unofficial mentor at this point. It's I will say this, that just on the LinkedIn comments and gossip that happened on there, but you do have these camps that they're say, at what point does this not a podcast anymore? Because podcasts were primarily, and especially like you, I mean, you were in the trenches with the audio.
Right.
And it's so creative because I listened to it on my drive from Vegas and walking around, and it's like, there is an art to just the sound. It's a different experience than someone just watching. And someone had told me this. This was someone that was pretty deep into the podcast game. They said, I think a lot of people are confusing a podcast from a YouTube talk show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, with what we're doing, it's like, is it? I mean, it's both. We're on Spotify and Apple, but we're pushing YouTube. So I guess my question is, do you think the audio only can survive? You don't think, even with like those episodic things, like the Harriet Tubman, for example?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I did not let you finish your question because I thought you were going to ask a different question. So ask the question again.
Maybe you should just go with what you thought I was.
Well, here's what I thought. Because when you're talking about the naysayers or the people that are on LinkedIn and they're, perhaps trying to be purists, I thought that's where you were.
I was going that direction. Yeah.
So my response to that would be, just get over it. We're always going to have audio, and the video element is exciting and new and it's different. And anyone who is trying to poo-poo the use of one medium as it intersects with the other they're not going to win. They're just not going to win, and they're not part of the growth of the industry. So, but that's not the question you were asking. I think the question you were asking was, these longer, like narrative shows and things like that. Is that what you meant?
Do you think is there a world where people will be able to get away with just doing audio still?
Yes. So the answer to that is there will still be shows that are best and probably they only should be done with audio. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that they have to have some kind of a video element. They can absolutely exist as audio only. It's just what I was, getting riled up about was like anybody who says that if it's crossing over to video, then it's not, it's not a quote podcast. And I'm just like, you're arguing over the wrong shit, man. Like it's already past you if that's what you're focused on. You're focused on the label and how it falls, and just come on. Like that's just so it just sounds as backward facing as you are. But when we did the Tubman show, we created a ton of social assets, and so animated audiograms and things like that implemented either everything from just headshots to other graphic elements, because we still will have some kind of a visual medium to promote the show and things like things along those lines. So I don't know. I think there's still going to be audio only, and I'll love it. Like there's been audio only as long as there's been audio, and it's still, there's still some incredible value in that. And so, it's exciting because it holds everything. It's big enough to hold both, I think is my point.
Okay, great. So podcasting's, it's here to stay.
It's here to stay. I hope,
yeah,
bro.
Right? Let's hope so. Tanner, this has been a true treat. before we get to the last word, how can the people find you, your companies? Where are all the appropriate places for people to go? Ingredient, everything.
That's right. The best place. So we're ingredientcreative.com, and our studio space that's here in Los Angeles in the Frogtown neighborhood, which is Silver Lake, Outwater Village, Los Feliz, that area, east side of town, is ingredientstudios.com. And then I'm Tanner Latham on LinkedIn professionally, and Tanner Latham on Instagram, professionally, personally. So those are probably the main channels. My wife is named Jennifer Davick, and so again, she's brilliant. And if you're looking for the real work and the real visual genius behind Ingredient, that's where you'd find it.
Okay, great. And I'll share this one note with you. So I recently heard someone on a podcast say, well, there's 600,000 podcasts, and unless you're in the top 200, you're not making any money, or you got to be in that top 200. So I actually looked at Eric and I go, hey, you would think that'd be defeating, but hey, man, we just need to get in the top 200.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
Let's just get in the top 200. Everything else will take care of itself.
Set your goals realistically, Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way I see it, we're already in it.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong.
Yeah. It's like,
prove me wrong.
Like, what source do you have? All of
That's
them?
right.
All of them.
them.
Check them twice.
Tanner, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is a true gift. I'm really glad we got to do this. Thank you for making the time. I always give the guests the last word. It can be absolutely anything you want to leave us with. How would you like to end this podcast?
One of the notes I brought in was a quote that that was very inspiring for me several years ago, and it's this guy named Seth Godin, who you might read. I know you read a lot of books, and I imagine that you've come across Seth. But it's really, really simple. He wrote, "Reject the tyranny of being picked. Period. Pick yourself." And I think that if there's anything in my life that I've been able to rely on over and over again, it's that when I did not rely on the gatekeepers to judge and dictate and tell me whether or not whatever I was creating or writing or the story I was trying to tell, when they weren't telling me that it was good, whenever I've not relied on them for their own approval, that's where I've won. And winning can be defined in a lot of different ways, but at least for myself, professionally and even personally, when I've picked myself, when I've not waited on someone else to pick me, I've always won. And so that's what I was thinking about coming into tonight.
That's awesome. That's one of the best last words we've ever had, and I love Seth. Tanner, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Sam Dever, the Sam Dever Podcast here, and I just want to thank you for checking out this episode. To watch and listen to future episodes, be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@thesamdeverpodcast. Thank you so much. See you soon.